Welcome to Eerie Echoes. Tonight, we bring you some of the most chilling true-style horrors from the Appalachian Mountains. Vanished travelers, screams that echo through the night, strangers lingering behind glass, and mysterious lights that carve holes in the earth. If you think you're safe sitting on your couch, remember, so did they. Now, let's begin. There are highways in the Appalachians that don't feel like roads at all, but long black corridors where the only light is what you bring with you. On Route 219, a young man vanished after leaving a simple message. "Someone is following me." Route 219 is not a busy highway. Once you leave the towns and the clusters of gas stations, you enter a long, lonely ribbon of asphalt that cuts through pines and ridges. People describe it as a place where radio static feels like company. That's where Ryan was last seen. Ryan was 29, a roofing foreman, practical and careful. Early October, he had gone north to visit his mother, and he was heading back south. He left before dusk, hoping to avoid deer on the road. At 6:07 p.m., he texted his girlfriend, "On my way, 2 hours tops." He was the kind of man who did things by the book, changed his oil early, kept a tire plug kit in the back, never dramatic. The last hour of his drive took him through the quietest part of 219. The road winds under the Blue Knob Hills, narrows between thick trees, and drops off into steep edges where you can't see far. He had a dash cam mounted, a cheap brand, which recorded most of the journey. What it could not show was what mattered most. Dash cams point forward. The danger was behind him. Around 8:19, Ryan called his girlfriend. The call went to voicemail, and what he left behind was short and chilling. He started normally, saying something strange was happening, then paused and added, "They're following me." In the background, you can hear the hum of the engine, the rhythm of tires crossing expansion joints, the faint rattle of tools in a box. He did not sound afraid. He sounded irritated, as if a car had been tailing him too long. The dashcam video shows a pair of headlights appear in his rear view around 8:21. They hold steady for minutes, never drifting closer or falling back, even as the road twists and dips. They weren't the harsh white of modern LEDs, but the warmer glow of older halogens. At 8:25, Ryan pulled into a gravel turnout, one of those unofficial overlooks where you'd only see a view in daylight. The headlights passed by, keeping a steady speed, never slowing. His dash cam caught the red taillights climbing the next hill. Ryan waited only a few seconds before pulling back onto the road. 2 minutes later, those same lights appeared behind him again. By 8:28, Ryan had dialed 911. The call lasted less than a minute before it cut out. Dispatchers later described his voice as calm but unsettled. He explained that a car kept circling back, sometimes passing him, then reappearing behind him again. He said it might be nothing, but it was strange. The dispatcher asked for a mile marker. Before he could answer, the call dissolved into static. The dashcam caught one more detail, a single sharp horn from the vehicle behind him. Not aggressive, not a warning, just a quick signal, like someone reminding him they were still there. Moments later, Ryan tapped his brakes, his taillights flashing. At 8:31, he turned into a small rest area, the kind with one broken picnic table and an overflowing dumpster. He parked in the far corner, facing out. The headlights passed by, continued down the highway, and disappeared into the dark. And then, the dashcam shut off. Ryan had turned the truck off. The final frame was of dark trees and a thin strip of fading sky. When a state trooper rolled through the rest area at 10:02 p.m. on routine patrol, the truck was still there. The driver's door was shut. The keys were not in the ignition. The wallet was in the center console. His phone was in the cup holder, dead. The trooper knocked on the window, ran the plates, checked the VIN. Nothing stood out. He assumed the driver was sleeping and drove on. That decision would haunt him later. By morning, Ryan was reported missing. He had not shown up for work. His girlfriend had heard nothing since the voicemail. When authorities returned to the truck, the scene told a quiet but troubling story. On the gravel near the front tires were scuff marks, as if someone had twisted their feet hard, bracing against the ground. 10 feet beyond, in the grass, faint impressions suggested a person had stepped into the tree line. No blood, no broken glass, just a direction. Investigators powered Ryan's phone and found the evidence frozen in time. The 819 voicemail, the 911 call, and in his notes app an unfinished line. Dark sedan, same plates? That question still unsettles people. If he had been close enough to see a plate, why the uncertainty? Was it the same car circling him, or two different cars that looked identical? Sheriff's deputies later pulled traffic camera footage from a gas station 15 miles north. A dark sedan appeared on camera at 7:54, heading south. Then again at 8:12, still heading south. The only way that was possible was if it had turned around somewhere in between. There are many reasons to double back on a country road, some innocent, some not. Search dogs followed Ryan's scent 80 yards into the trees until they reached the remains of an old logging road. Beyond that, the scent vanished. Old ruts and gravel erase more than footsteps. People argue about what happened on Route 219. Some say the woods claimed him. Others believe people did. The dash cam never caught anyone approaching his window. The phone never recorded a final word. What remains is a man's truck, his wallet, his phone, and his last message. Someone is following me. Ryan's disappearance still hangs over Route 219. A man careful with every detail of his life left behind a truck in perfect order and nothing else. It's not the dash cam or the calls or even the unfinished note that lingers. It's the silence after. And if that story leaves you uneasy about lonely roads, the next will remind you that even the most beautiful trails can swallow people whole. Our second story takes us deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains, where a hiker vanished without a trace. The Blue Ridge Mountains are full of trails that promise peace and beauty, but they've also taken people who never came back. One hiker's story stands out not for how he vanished, but for what he left behind. The Blue Ridge is not the most remote corner of the Appalachians, but it has a way of making you feel swallowed. The forests are dense, the ridges repeat like waves, and the trails stretch farther than maps admit. People hike there for solitude. Some find more than they wanted. The hiker's name was Aaron, 32 years old, an avid outdoorsman but not reckless. He'd done day hikes, weekend trips, and was confident with gear. In early September, he parked at a trailhead near Roan Mountain. His plan was simple: hike up to a ridge, camp overnight, return the next day. He told his sister he'd text by Sunday night. Saturday went well. He signed the trail register around noon, cheerful, neat handwriting. Weather was clear, night still mild. Other hikers saw him on the trail. One couple remembered his orange pack. Another remembered he asked for the time. Nothing strange. By Monday, when he hadn't contacted his family, search and rescue was called. His car was still at the trailhead. At first, it seemed like the typical overdue hiker call. Teams went out. Dogs swept the trail. Helicopters circled. On Tuesday morning, his backpack was found half a mile off trail, resting against a boulder as if placed there. Inside was his gear: food sealed, map folded, phone tucked carefully. Not dumped, not torn, organized. His water filter was laid across the top, dry. His boots were missing. His wallet and ID were inside. It was as if he had simply stepped out of his life and walked barefoot into the woods. Searchers expanded outward. No prints, no clothing scraps, no broken brush. A forest ranger said it best. He walked out of his pack like he was coming right back. Only he didn't. The area was searched for over a week. Nothing. Weeks later, hunters reported something odd near the same ridge. They said they'd heard faint whistling in the trees at dusk. Not bird song, not wind, whistling. They called out, but no one replied. They found nothing except stacked stones near a fallen log, 3 balanced on top of each other. The search had ended by then, so it went unreported officially. Aaron's family pressed for more. They asked for phone records. His last text had been sent Saturday afternoon. On ridge, good view, will call tonight. He never called. Cell towers showed no pings afterward. It was as if his phone had been shut off deliberately and then carefully placed in the pack. Theories multiplied. Some believed he got disoriented and wandered. But if that were true, why leave the pack? Others suggested foul play, but no one else was reported in the area at that time, and the gear was untouched, nothing stolen. There is an unspoken theory in the hiking community about places like the Blue Ridge. Sometimes the forest keeps what it wants. Stories circulate of hikers who feel followed or see shadows at the edge of their campfires. People don't like to say it out loud, but some trails feel like they don't want you there. The last confirmed detail about Aaron is simple. He was careful, prepared, and cautious. The only physical sign of him is a backpack placed as neatly as if he meant to return to it. But he never did. The Blue Ridge Mountains are beautiful, but beauty doesn't mean safety. Aaron's disappearance was not a stumble, not an accident you can explain with logic. It was a vanishing marked by order, not chaos. His belongings arranged, his last message unfinished. And the silence afterward is the loudest part. If trails can erase a person so completely, what about the sounds that echo through forests at night? Our next story brings us to the Monongahela National Forest, where campers heard something no one wants to hear in the dark: the cry of a child. The woods can play tricks on your ears, but when you hear a child crying in the middle of the Monongahela forest, miles from the nearest road, it's not something you can laugh off. The Monongahela National Forest stretches across West Virginia like a green ocean, dense, endless, and old. Campers say that at night, when the wind calms and the trees stop moving, the silence feels alive. That's when you hear things. 2 college students, Eric and Daniel, decided to camp there on a fall weekend. They weren't thrill seekers, just hikers looking for cheap adventure before classes picked up again. They pitched their tent near a small stream, cooked noodles on a camp stove, and settled in. By midnight, the woods had gone completely still. That was when the sound came. At first, Eric thought it was the wind, a high whistle through the branches, but then it bent into something too human. It was a child's cry, soft, stuttering, filled with that uneven sob that only a small child makes. Both of them froze. They waited for it to stop. It didn't. The sound came from the trees beyond the stream, always the same distance away, no matter where they turned. They called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" But the crying didn't change. It didn't get closer, didn't retreat. It just lingered. For an hour they listened. Every time they tried to follow the sound with their lights, it shifted, like it was moving just out of reach. Eventually, exhaustion and fear made them retreat into their tent. They lay awake, every nerve raw, until dawn bled through the trees. When the sun rose, they decided to check the stream bank where the sound had been loudest. The mud was smooth, no tracks, no sign of any person, but caught between two rocks was something that made their blood run cold. A child. Red sneaker, small, waterlogged, with the laces tangled. They brought it back to the nearest ranger station. Authorities took it seriously, searching the area with dogs and volunteers. Nothing turned up. Later, an older ranger told them about a case from years before. A boy named Tommy had gone missing while camping with his family not far from where the students had been. The search back then had lasted for days. They'd found nothing but small piles of stacked stones near the riverbank. His body was never recovered. DNA testing on the shoe came back inconclusive. Too much water damage. No one could say if it belonged to Tommy or not. For weeks after, locals whispered about the student's story. Some believed the crying was a trick of owls or foxes, animals whose calls sometimes mimic human distress. But the detail that chilled people was how the sound never changed distance. It stayed exactly where it was, as though it wanted to be heard but not reached. Eric and Daniel both dropped the class they had together after that semester. Neither would camp in Monongahela again. When asked about it years later, Eric admitted, "It wasn't just the crying. It was how calm it sounded, like it knew we'd stay up all night listening. The forest has plenty of ways to keep you awake. Some of them don't belong to any animal. Hearing a child cry should make you want to help." In the Monongahela, it made two campers pack up and leave. Whether it was the echo of a long unsolved disappearance or something else entirely, the sound followed them home, long after the forest let them go. If voices can echo through the trees, then what about screams that shake the very ground? Our next story takes us to an abandoned quarry, where the rocks themselves seem to cry out in the night. Abandoned places are quiet by design. But in one Appalachian quarry, silence was replaced by screams that seemed to come from the rock itself. Quarries have a way of swallowing sound. The pits are deep, the walls sheer, and when you stand inside, your voice spirals upward instead of outward. Ours had been abandoned for decades, a scar in the hills where stone had once been carved out for road projects. Now it was just a hollow, or at least that's what we thought, until the summer when the screaming began. Locals first heard it in August. A family living half a mile away swore they heard a drawn-out cry in the middle of the night. They thought it was an animal, maybe a fox or a bobcat. But foxes don't sound like tearing metal, and this was longer, rawer, echoing across the valley like someone trapped below. By the second week, people were whispering. Teens dared each other to go listen. Farmers claimed they heard it when the wind shifted, even with their tractors running. The sheriff, tired of the calls, dismissed it as nature. But people in town had lived with nature all their lives. They knew when something was wrong. One night, 3 of us decided to see for ourselves. The pit was about a 20-minute walk from the road, hidden behind a fringe of pines. We carried lights and nothing else. The ground crunched with loose rock as we climbed the rim. At 12:31 a.m., it happened. The first scream tore out of the quarry and wrapped itself around us. It wasn't an echo, it was origin, the kind of sound that vibrates in your ribs and makes your teeth ache. We looked at each other but couldn't speak. Then another came, closer, sharper, from directly below where we stood. Will, the EMT among us, tried to be rational. He edged forward, light cutting across the pit. His beam found only walls and shadows. Then a third scream burst out, and this one wasn't distant at all. It came from under our feet, as if the stone floor itself had opened a mouth. The rocks trembled under us. Dust showered down. We bolted back down the path, hearts racing, convinced the ground might collapse. But the quarry held, solid and dark, even as the sound faded behind us. The next day, we told the sheriff. He brought in an engineer. They stood at the rim in daylight while we explained. The engineer shook his head. He said shifting stone could create noises when temperatures changed. He said echoes in enclosed spaces could sound human. He had an answer for everything. But 2 nights later, a group of teenagers went down into the quarry floor. They were brave or foolish, or both. At 3 in the morning, one of them scrambled out alone, white-faced and shaking. The others had to be pulled out at dawn by search teams. None of them were physically harmed, but one boy muttered the same sentence over and over. "It said my name. It screamed my name." By September, the quarry was posted with no trespassing signs. That didn't stop the rumors. People claimed to hear the cries from miles away, even through closed windows. A hunter said his hounds refused to go near the ridge. The sound was fading with the cooler weather, but every time the night turned warm again, someone reported hearing it. Skeptics still argue. They say it was foxes, or stress fractures in the rock, or teenagers stirring up a story. But those who were there don't need to argue. They remember how the ground shook, how the air itself seemed to vibrate, how the screams went on longer than any living thing could draw breath. The quarry is silent now, as far as anyone admits. But it sits waiting, a hollow in the hills. People drive past the old access road and glance away, because they know what we learned standing at the rim, that silence is no guarantee of peace. Sometimes it's just the breath before the next scream. Some places in the Appalachians don't just echo sound, they create it. The quarry was supposed to be empty, but the cries that came from it carried weight, enough to break rational explanations. Whether it was the stone itself or something trapped beneath it, the truth is that not all silences stay quiet. If screams can rise out of solid rock, then lights can just as easily appear where no one should be. Our next story takes us to a ridge where strange white orbs moved with purpose and left the ground scarred by fresh-dug holes. On quiet nights, the ridge above town looked like it was stitched with stars. But these weren't stars. They were lights moving where no road or trail existed, and by morning the earth itself bore the scars. Our town sat in a valley, cradled between 2 ridges with a river cutting through the center. Sound carried in strange ways there. A dog barking on the west ridge would echo on the east side like a ghost. So when people first saw the lights, they thought it was just kids messing around. Something explainable. Something normal. The first night, it was just 2 or 3 faint glows along the ridgeline. White, steady, drifting slow like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Too far to be flashlights, too deliberate to be reflections. People on their porches pointed and laughed. "High schoolers with headlamps," someone said. And that was that. But the lights came back the next night. Same time, 11:40 p.m., 2, then 3, then 4. They moved in patterns, pausing, lowering, then sliding sideways across the slope. No one heard motors, no hum of ATVs, no crunch of boots, just silence and light. By the third night, laughter was gone. Curiosity had shifted into unease. The sheriff drove a unit up the service road with his deputy. They parked and cut their headlights, waiting. For half an hour, the ridge glowed. The deputy swore he saw one of the lights dip to the ground and vanish, as if someone crouched. They climbed toward the spot, but when their flashlights hit the slope, there was nothing. The lights were gone. Morning revealed something the valley hadn't expected. 6 square holes in the soil, each about 18 inches deep, neatly cut into the earth, like someone had been testing the ground. The spacing was odd, not random. almost a line. There were no tracks leading in or out, just raw dirt exposed where grass had been. Rumors spread fast. Grave robbers, some said. Others muttered about treasure hunters. But no one could explain why anyone would dig in perfect silence, in full view of the entire valley. On the fourth night, 3 of us hiked halfway up the slope to watch. We killed our lights and sat in the dark. Around midnight, the glow returned. 2 orbs drifted just 20 yards away, pale and steady, casting no beam, no flicker. They hovered above the ground, paused, then lowered until they vanished into the brush. A faint scraping sound rose from the dirt, like a spade dragged through soil. One of us broke, flicked his headlamp on. The slope lit up, but there was nothing, just freshly turned dirt where another hole had appeared. By the 7th night, the holes had connected into a shallow trench stretching across the ridge. Someone compared the pattern to old maps, and the shape matched exactly where an 1800s cemetery had once stood, moved, supposedly, when the highway came through. Officially, no graves remained. Unofficially, the lights disagreed. The sheriff set up a game camera, triggered by motion. It caught deer, raccoons, and once, at exactly 11:43 p.m., a single white flare that washed the frame completely blank. Nothing else. In spring, grass covered the trench, erasing the marks. People hoped the story would fade, but one April night, the lights returned. This time, only one. It glided to the center of the old line and sank into the ground. The next morning, townsfolk found a single new hole. Deeper. Narrow. Not like the others. It went down so far the flashlight beams couldn't find the bottom. After that, the ridge became a place you didn't look at after dark. Kids dared each other, but most of us learned to pull our curtains. It was easier not to know if the lights were back, probing the earth again, because they weren't just wandering. They had a plan, and the soil told us they were looking for something. Lights aren't supposed to leave evidence, but these did. They came with purpose, and they left the ground scarred. Whether it was human hands or something stranger, the ridge reminded us that not every star you see belongs to the sky. If lights can carve holes in the earth, then voices can vanish into the air just as easily. Our next story follows a hunter whose last radio call still echoes in the mountains. There is someone behind me. A hunter's voice over the radio is usually calm. Weather updates, deer sightings, the usual chatter. But one call ended with 5 words that still haunt everyone who heard them. There's someone behind me. Hunting season in the Appalachians begins before the sun even rises. The woods are damp, the air sharp, and the silence broken only by boots moving through brush. For Eric and Dale, 2 friends who had hunted together since high school, it was routine. They knew each other's patterns, each other's voices. That's why what happened that November morning still doesn't make sense. They left camp before dawn, carrying rifles and radios. The plan was simple. Split up on opposite sides of a creek bed, keep in touch, meet back at noon. Their radios were old but reliable, the kind with long antennas and a bit of static but strong enough to carry across valleys. At 7:14 a.m., Eric's radio crackled. It was Dale. His voice was clipped, tense. He said he needed Eric to hold the line. Then a pause, heavy breathing, and finally the words, "I don't see anyone, but I hear steps." That was the last clear sentence he spoke. Eric tried to respond, but the signal broke into hissing static. Still, the radio stayed open. On the other end, he could hear Dale moving, leaves crunching, boots scuffing rock, then silence. Long stretches of silence, broken by the sound of breath, short, uneven, as if Dale was holding it back. Eric started toward the creek, fast. His rifle banged against his shoulder as he cut through brush. The closer he got, the stronger the unease became. The radio was still alive, carrying faint noises, but no voice. At the creek bed, he found something that made his chest go cold. Dale's glove lying in the mud. Not dropped carelessly, but placed. Fingers stretched, palm up. Beside it, an unlit cigarette butt, half crushed, brand unfamiliar. Eric called his name. No answer. Within the hour, a search was underway. Dozens of hunters and deputies swept the area. Dogs caught a trail that led half a mile upriver before cutting suddenly into dense pines. There, in soft ground, were two sets of tracks. One matched Dale's boots. The other was smaller, lighter, almost barefoot in shape, like the ground itself resisted giving details. The prints followed side by side for 30 yards, then stopped. The forest floor beyond was smooth, undisturbed, as if nothing had passed through at all. The search stretched for days. They found Dale's hat snagged on a branch, his second glove near a mossy log, and finally his radio, antenna bent and cracked. The batteries were drained, but when powered later, the last audio still played. Dale's breathing, the faint shift of weight, and those final words, "There's someone behind me." Some blamed another hunter, maybe someone poaching out of season, but no shots were fired. No struggle was found. Others believed Dale stumbled into something older, folklore about watchers in the woods, silent figures that walk parallel until they choose to stop. Eric never hunted that ridge again. He said the worst part wasn't the missing gear or the unanswered search. It was how calm Dale's voice had been, right up until the last moment. Not panicked, not shouting, just certain. In the end, the mountains kept Dale. No body was ever found. Just the open radio call still on file, a haunting reminder that sometimes it isn't the deer watching you in the forest. A hunter knows the woods, the sounds of every branch and step. Dale knew the difference between an animal and a person. His calm certainty in that last call makes it impossible to dismiss. And if someone or something was behind him, they left no trace the searchers could follow. If footsteps can vanish in the woods, then shadows can stand at your window just as easily. Our next story drifts from the hunting grounds to a remote rental cabin, where one guest realized she wasn't as alone as she thought. A cabin in the woods should mean peace, crackling fires, quiet nights, and solitude. But for one woman, the window of her rented cabin became a mirror that showed she wasn't alone. People book mountain cabins for silence, for that clean sense of being away from everything. You expect the only sounds to be the stove popping or the wind brushing the roof. What you never expect is to roll over in bed and see someone standing at the glass. Lydia was 30, burned out from office life in Richmond, and wanted nothing more than a long weekend of quiet. She booked a small A-frame in the Appalachians, marketed as secluded and cozy. The photos showed string lights on a porch, a wood stove, and wide windows that looked out on endless trees. Reviews were glowing, exactly what she thought she needed. The first day was perfect. She drove up, stocked the fridge, walked the ridge trail that circled behind the property. The air was crisp, leaves already shifting into their fall colors. When evening came, she lit the stove, curled on the couch with chamomile tea, and read until her eyelids grew heavy. Sometime after midnight, she woke. Not to a sound, but to a feeling as though someone else was in the room. Moonlight cut pale stripes across the floor. She rolled over toward the wide bedroom window and froze. Outside, standing just beyond the glass, was a tall figure. Motionless, straight, its head tilted slightly as if listening to her breath. Too straight to be a tree, too intent to be shadow. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Her phone was on the nightstand. She reached carefully, sliding her hand across the sheets. No service, not a single bar. The figure didn't move. She blinked, rubbed her eyes. Still there. Then, without walking away, it seemed to recede, swallowed by the dark. She didn't sleep again. At dawn, she stepped outside, convincing herself it had been a dream. The deck boards were damp with dew, but under the bedroom window, streaks smeared across the glass. Long vertical lines like fingers pressed and dragged downward. Her stomach dropped. She called the host, voice tight. The host laughed. "Oh, honey, there's nobody up there but you. Sometimes bears nose the windows and leave smudges. Nothing to worry about." But Lydia knew the difference between a paw print and a hand. These were long, human. That night she closed every curtain, checked every lock. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock, 2. Nothing. Her body relaxed by degrees. She told herself the mind plays tricks. At 3:14 a.m., the lamp flickered. She looked at the drawn curtain. It was moving, not from wind. The window was sealed. Something pressed against it from the outside. Slowly, deliberately. The fabric swelled inward as if breath pushed it. She couldn't scream, couldn't move. For long minutes, she watched the curtain pulse with unseen breathing. Then the pressure eased. Silence returned. Morning showed the curtain rod bent, one hook snapped loose. And outside, in the soil beneath the window, tracks led into the trees. Barefoot, toes splayed wide, not small like a child's, long, narrow, unmistakably human. She left that day, hours before checkout. The host messaged later. "Sorry you cut it short. Next time try our lake cabin even quieter." Lydia didn't answer. Friends asked why she didn't stay, why she didn't confront it, why she didn't get video proof. But fear doesn't work like that. When you're pinned in your bed, staring at a curtain that breathes, you're not planning evidence. You're planning survival. Even now, back in her city apartment, she sometimes wakes at 3 a.m., staring at her own window. She swears she hears faint breath against the glass. Because cabins aren't always empty. And sometimes, what you see outside the glass isn't it meant to be looking in. It is meant to be waiting. What makes the story unsettling isn't just the figure outside the glass, but the details it left behind. Streaks on the window, bent hardware, footprints in the dirt. You can deny shadows, but you can't deny evidence. If someone can stand silently at your window in the dead of night, then something just as quiet can walk through the hall of your cabin. Our next story is about a guest who discovered the cold inside his rental wasn't a tea from the weather. It was from something moving in the dark. Cabins are supposed to keep the cold out. But in this Appalachian rental, the chill wasn't in the walls or the thermostat. It walked the hallway at night. The cabin was advertised as peaceful, private, and fully modern. To Jesse, that meant he could finish a project in silence with Wi-Fi strong enough for work, but far enough from the city that he wouldn't hear sirens. He wasn't chasing ghost stories. He wanted numbers, deadlines, and nothing but the sound of keys clicking. At first, the place delivered. A small kitchen, a narrow hall, a bedroom at the end. The host had left a handwritten note on the counter. "Tea is in the cupboard. Enjoy your stay." The thermostat glowed a steady 68 degrees. Outside, wind rustled the trees, the kind of sound that makes you feel protected by the walls around you. The first night, Jesse noticed nothing unusual. He worked late, made tea, and finally lay down close to 1 a.m. The house creaked as it settled, the way wooden houses do. He let the quiet carry him into sleep. The second night, the house made a different sound. At first it was subtle, like wood stretching. But then it fell into rhythm. Footsteps, soft, measured, not boots, not shoes, more like someone walking in socks. They started at the far end of the hall and padded slowly toward his door. Jesse held still, listening hard. The steps paused. He whispered to himself, "Old floorboards, nothing more." Minutes later, they came again. 4 steps, pause, 3 more, then silence. At 3:07 a.m., he woke freezing. One half of his body was warm under the blanket. The other half felt like he'd rolled against an open refrigerator door. He checked the thermostat, still steady. He checked the window, closed tight. But the air in that room had layers, warmth on one side, icy breath on the other. The third day, Jesse tried logic. He opened the host's smart lock app, scrolling through the log. At 12:41 a.m., the record showed, door opened. Seconds later, door closed. But Jesse had checked the chain that night. It was still latched in the morning. He stared at the phone, trying to reconcile 2 truths at once. That night, he set his own phone to record audio, leaving it on the dresser. When he listened back in the morning, the file began with silence. Then, at 1:23 a.m., came 6 soft steps, a pause, then 3 more. At 1:38, the faint creak of a hinge, as if a door halfway down the hall had moved. The cabin only had one interior door besides his, the bathroom. The 4th night, the sounds grew bolder. Jesse braced the front door with a chair. At 2 a.m., he woke to the scrape of wood shifting. The chair trembled against the knob, twice, and then stilled. He held his breath for minutes, eyes fixed on the dark outline of the door. Nothing entered, but he knew something had tried. In the morning, he noticed smudges on the wall of the hallway, waist-high, gray streaks that looked like the residue of repeated touches. When he rubbed at them, the cloth came away with oily dirt, like handprints but wider, blurred. On the 5th night, he aimed his phone camera at the front door, propped on the table. The video never showed the door open, but at 12:43, the hallway light dimmed, flickered, then returned. The thermostat log showed a sudden 5-degree drop only in the living room, as if cold had pooled there, ignoring the rest of the house. By dawn, Jesse's decision was made. He packed without looking down the hall, left the key on the counter, and drove away without checking the mirrors. When his colleagues asked later why he'd come back early, he said the internet was spotty. That was easier to explain than footsteps recorded at 1 a.m., or a chair that shook without hands, or air that moved like it belonged to someone else. He never left a review, because sometimes telling a story makes it bigger, stronger, like feeding it. And Jesse had no intention of bringing that cold back with him. The most unsettling part of Jesse's week wasn't the footsteps, or the doors, or the shifting lights. It was the silence of the evidence. Logs, recordings, details that shouldn't exist. You can deny fear in your head, but you can't deny data that says something else was inside. If the cold can walk through a cabin, then voices can travel through the air just as easily. Our next story takes us to Greenbrier, where a search for a missing boy led to radio calls no one on the team ever claimed to make. Search and rescue looks tidy on television. Clean grids, fast answers, tidy endings. In Greenbrier County, the maps filled with orange tape, the radios filled with static, and a child's name seemed to drift through the air from nowhere at all. We were called in on a Saturday in September late afternoon, the kind of day when the air goes thin along the river and the light turns the hemlocks metallic. A boy had vanished from a family campsite at a state park not far from the water. 5 years old, small, quick red canvas sneakers with white rubber toes, double knotted. One moment would have been a lifetime to his parents. In the time it took to fold a camp chair, He was simply not there. By 5, base had shape. A pop-up tent for command. A folding table with maps that never feel big enough. Flagging tape fluttering from sawhorses. A ranger set out scent articles in clear bags. K9 handlers briefed us by pointing at topo lines that always look innocent on paper. The first assignments went to the creek bottoms and the trails radiating from the campground. I landed on Team 2 with Jen and a volunteer named Marsh, who had the kind of voice you can hear through a ridge. The woods at dusk know how to swallow sound. We moved slow because small legs wander in curves, not lines. We called the boy S name the way you do when you want fear to sound like a game. The forest replied with the regulars. Water cuffing rocks, a branch snapping under nothing that needs a name, the one-note scold of a bird that doesn't care about your emergency. We counted steps out loud because counting is the only control you get at night. At 9, command ran the routine radio check. Voices came back thinner than usual, as if the trees had turned the squelch down on everyone. Then, threading the static, a single breath-shaped syllable came through on our channel, the boy's name, spoken too low for a child and too near to be a distant team. Nobody owned it. Command said it was bleed from another channel, maybe county or a trucker somewhere on a high road. You learn to build shelves of reasons in this work and place explanations there until they re-needed. We placed it and kept moving. K9 reached us shortly after. Nose to a shirt from the family's camper, tail a metronome set to urgency. The dog pulled upstream, checked, pulled again, then gave what handlers call a soft alert near a stump no one would notice in daylight. On top sat 3 small stones, balanced neat as teeth. It meant nothing you could put in a report. It meant everything to your nerves. We photographed, flagged, and kept to our grid. Later, a voice came through again. Not a word you could sue anyone for, just a short, hoarse utterance shaped exactly like a person locating themselves across water. Command asked for anyone who had keyed a mic to identify. No one did. We tried the oldest triangulation method there is, point your bodies where it sounds louder and walk 10 paces. It kept moving like a cloud shadow that wouldn't stay pinned to ground. Midnight brought the first stand down. Coffee at base tastes like salvation, even when the pot's been burned twice. The boy OS parents stared at the tree line like people who had spent their entire lives learning how to look at the last place they'd seen a thing they loved. A local pastor came and said words you could set your hands on for a minute. Command wrote interference on a legal pad in thick letters and underlined it twice. We went back out. Day 2 gave us weather that wanted to help. Cool, clear, without wind, and a small red shoelace caught in a tangle of root the way a worm sits after rain. It matched the description, down to the flat weave and frayed plastic tip. Evidence techs bagged it without ceremony. Teams widened their arcs. The creek split into braids that erased tracks as politely as a stagehand clearing a set. Twice more, the radios carried something that wasn't speech and wasn't exactly noise. We logged times, bearings, and the exact degree of unease. By sunset, the map at command looked like a child had scribbled orange across green. Helicopter passes had given us nothing but beautiful false hope. Thermal imagers are honest. They show heat, and heat wasn't there. We held briefings in sentences that knew how to sit down. We slept in shifts, and sleep was more of an agreement than a reality. Day 3 took us higher into laurel that behaves like wire. A deer path pretended to be a solution, and then ended under a log with a view of nothing that mattered. We found nothing else. No clothing fiber bright in leaf litter, no print clear enough to measure. The woods sometimes hold what they take. You learn to say that without letting it sound like surrender. 2 weeks afterward, a fisherman found a red shoe half a mile downstream, waterlogged, laces missing. The lab did what labs do. It tested, caveated, and refused to tell a story the data couldn't support. The report might as well have been weather. Probabilities, no certainties. People ask whether I believe radios can pick up the dead. I carry 2 answers because the job demands it. Interference is real. Channels bleed. Distant mics open and the sky throws your voice where it wasn't meant to go. The other answer is the one that sits behind my ribs. A name kept arriving on a frequency we were supposed to own, and it sounded too close to be a trick of terrain. When I think about Greenbrier now, I don't replay the maps or the grids. I see 3 small stones on a stump beside moving water. I hear a syllable shaped like location slipping in and out of our headsets. And I remember how the forest can feel like a mirror that only reflects what you bring into it. Fear, hope, and the certainty that not every search ends at the edge of a map. Search and rescue is repetition and restraint. Call, listen, mark, move. In Greenbrier, the process was unchanged, but the air felt different, as if the forest had learned how to speak our language for a moment and then forgot. There are reasons that fit on a shelf, and there are reasons that don't. The boy's absence still belongs to the second kind. If a name can float across a frequency with no mouth attached to it, footsteps can float across a trail with no body you can catch. Our final story follows a hiker on the Appalachian Trail who felt a presence matching her pace for days, always out of sight, always one bend behind. Most dangers on the Appalachian Trail are honest: weather, miles, exhaustion. The presence that shadowed a solo hiker wasn't honest at all. It stayed where cameras couldn't see and moved only when she did. I first heard about the shadow from a shelter logbook, the kind of battered notebook where people copy weather reports and draw crude maps to water sources. Someone had written, in handwriting that pressed too hard into the paper, that a tall shape had been following her. Weeks later, at a small outfitter in a trail town, I heard the longer version. It was not a campfire brag. It was an account trimmed of drama and still heavy as wet canvas. She had started in the south as a section hiker, meant to travel a few hundred miles north. Early spring, before the crowds. She wasn't fragile about solitude. The trail teaches you to be your own company. The first days moved the way they should. Rhododendron tunnels, switchbacks that coil up ridges, small camps where soup tastes better than it deserves. The first oddness arrived in a tent the color of a bruise, just off the path near a saddle where wind collects. She lay between breaths and noticed another cadence layered under her own, a steady inhalation too close to be wind and too regular to be imagination. When she held her breath, it paused. When she unzipped and put light on trees that came up like ribs from the ground, nothing owned the sound. Morning explained it away because mornings are good at that. A day later, a new pattern joined the hike. When she stopped to adjust a strap or drink, there would be a lagging scuff in the dirt behind her, shy of the volume of a human, but wrong for deer. She began to test it. Stop, listen, pivot. The trail behind offered only green distances and insect buzz. Twice, she brought out her phone and filmed backward as she walked. Videos later showed only trees, a little lens flare, and the crunch of her own boots. Cameras tell truth in one direction at a time. Toward evening of the 6th day, as the sun turned the understory to glass, she saw a thing that fit the word silhouette and nothing else. It stood beyond her firelight, tall and spare between 2 trunks, cut out of the same darkness as everything around it, yet somehow distinct. The line of a head, a suggestion of shoulders, no glitter of eyes. She swept her headlamp. The beam carved bark and air. The space where it had been felt like a hole after a tooth. There are ways to trick a follower on a trail. Double back around a bend and wait motionless. Step off into Laurel for 20 heartbeats and let the path go blank, then re-enter. She tried both. The feeling of being paced eased for minutes at a time, then settled back across her shoulders like a pack that had been set down and then hoisted again. Her journal entries, later found when she mailed a box home at a resupply, were spare and repetitive. The same sentence appears between notes on mileage and food, that she didn't feel alone. The handwriting degrades in a way that has nothing to do with weather. The last night before she made a decision, the wind pushed hard enough on her tent poles to make them sing. Sometime after 3 in the morning, a thin sequence of notes threaded the noise. Not bird, not branch. The kind of tune a person hums when words won't come, rising and falling in 3 steps. She unzipped just enough to put the lamp's circle into air. The sound ended exactly where her light began, as if the dark had performed and then realized it was being watched. At dawn, fear turned into logistics. She packed in a kind of blur and aimed for a shelter marked on her guide where other hikers would gather. 20 miles is a long day on good legs. Fear lends extra. She reached the shelter before full dark, where the kind noises of other people sleeping, snoring, turning, the whisper of nylon, stitched her back into the world. She did not sleep much, but what sleep she got did not have footsteps in it. She stepped off trail the next day at the first road crossing that offered a hitch, took the shuttle into town, and put a thumbtack in the map of places she would not hike alone again. She didn't call it defeat. She called it a boundary she had learned to respect. Whether the presence had been a person moving cleverly off trail or something without a clean name, the effect was the same. It lived in the space between her steps and would not be recorded. Trail culture prefers stories you can nail down, bare encounters, storms survived, blisters earned and healed. This one doesn't grant that satisfaction. It remains in negative space. No print, no video. Only a sequence of matched silences and a walker who decided to stop supplying the conditions the presence seemed to like. On a long green tunnel of a trail, you learn that seeing isn't the only way to know. Sometimes the proof is in what refuses to be captured. The pause that matches your breath, the step that waits for yours, the sound that ends when you put light on it. Reasonable explanations exist, and they sit comfortably on the shelf. Yet the weight of the unease remains where you set your pack down. That's the last of tonight's stories from the Appalachian spine. Roads that absorb drivers, ridges that glow with intent, radios that carry names, and footsteps that mirror your own. If one of these tales lodged under your skin, tell me which one in the comments. Your thoughts might be the next breadcrumb on a longer path. And if you want more nights like this, don't forget to subscribe to Eerie Echoes, leave a like, and share with someone who thinks the woods are safe after dark. Turn your lights back on if you need to. And if you ever head into those mountains, remember, sometimes the trail is following you.